Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you here. Actually, I'll just close over the door. So great to have you all here for what I think will be a really interesting and important event. My name is Orla Feely. I'm the Vice President in UCD for Research, Innovation and Impact. So we have a very interesting agenda for you now between now and 2 o'clock. I'll introduce our speakers one by one, and then we'll have a Q&A after all the speakers have given us their presentations. So first up is Deirdre Lillis. I know Deirdre well. We served together in the trenches on the board of the HEA for a number of years. Deirdre at that point was the head of computer science in TU Dublin. She's since gone on to join DFERIS, the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, where she is Assistant Secretary with responsibility for this whole domain of research and innovation and all the wonderful things that we're doing in higher education in this regard. So Deirdre is going to speak to us now. Deirdre, we're delighted to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Orla. This takes me back to previous roles where you look at the slides and hope there's no typos. So, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and it's actually brilliant to be back in a university environment. Actually, as Orla said, most of my career was spent in a university setting, mainly building research capacity. I was the one writing the funding proposals and recruiting the PhD students and that, so in the computer science domain, but my own little bit of dabbling with research was always in the impact, and in higher education policy and that. So I suppose it's a very interesting topic. It's a real priority for us in the new division in DFERIS, and I have Trudy Duffy, who's heading up our evidence for policy unit. A new unit established to lead out in this agenda. So maybe just to give some high level maybe overviews on, sorry, if this is working now. Oh yeah, perfect. You're probably all very familiar at this stage with the new research and innovation strategy, Impact 2030, which was launched on the 18th of May. DFERIS is leading out in it, Department of Further Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. Bit of a mouthful, but it is bringing a tertiary perspective on our higher education, further education system, but also that integration with the research and innovation system as well. I think it's been quite well received, and the feedback we've got certainly out when we're talking to people is they like the new emphasis on it. It's very much trying to build on hard-won strengths. I mean, we're a very small country on the global stage in R&I. We have to be very careful what we invest in. And I think a lot of the work that would have been done over the last decade is amplified and brought through, but there is a clear change of emphasis, I think. I think maybe Innovation 2020 was more about enterprise, sat under the Department of Enterprise as a strategy. So there is a shift definitely in this, I think, into the socioeconomic remit. Much more about impact on social goals, on national challenges, and I suppose the clue really is in the title. It is about how do we transform the investment in R&I into impact for communities, for citizens, for enterprises, and the wider community. I suppose key objectives within it. This idea of maximising impact I think is really important. That came through very strongly in the consultation processes, and we're hoping that the objectives within the strategy are moving towards that. Very strong focus on talent, and I think we're already hopefully starting the ball rolling on that. You might have seen the PhD supports review that was announced a couple of weeks back, maybe last week. Talent is the bedrock, because if we don't have really committed, strong, motivated, highly skilled people coming through from the university sector into our research systems, where, and then giving them really rewarding careers throughout. I think that's something there's work to be done on, definitely. And then I suppose the last piece really, which is again a bedrock, what we do has to be excellent. But I think impact, relevance, and excellence aren't mutually exclusive. I think we have to find a way. You get one of the three, you're doing great, but put them all together, and I think you've a great synergy. It's kind of the holy grail, So Impact 2030 in 5 pillars. I suppose the key one for today, which is in the public policy, evidence for policy domain, is pillar 1. There are specific initiatives within that to strengthen connections between government departments and the public research system, to embed R&I at the centre of public policy development, and then strengthening innovation across the public service and strengthening the citizen's voice. And there have been initiatives in each of those so far. Some key initiatives throughout the strategy that are probably maybe again relevant for today. DFERS has the National R&I research or policy brief. Now that's important because what it's doing for the first time in a long time is bringing research policy in under a department that has responsibility for the university sector as well. There was a dichotomy, I think, and I think bringing them together, it's also a whole of government approach. So it's, we're not, DFERS isn't just developing policy for research and innovation for the university sector. We have a remit to bring the big spenders on R&I expenditure in the other government departments in under this remit. So we have an Impact 2030 strategy steering group, which has the 5 government departments that account for 95% of R&I expenditure. So ourselves will be the biggest in DFERS, enterprise, health, agriculture, and I'm missing environment and climate in there. Just to note as well, the other, 11 government departments account for 5%. So there are 11 government departments that aren't spending as much as they probably should be on R&I. So I think there's an opportunity there. I think in terms of public policy and engaging the research community, maybe picking the places we can have most impact. We're probably not going to get in the door of agriculture when they have Teagasc, for their science advice. If we went to government departments that don't have their internal research capacity as strong, maybe there's opportunities in that space. And some other key initiatives, we'll be establishing a research and innovation advisory forum, which will be chaired by the Minister of DFERS, probably January, February timescale. That's to get a voice from people who aren't really involved. You're not a research funder, you're not a research performer, but you might have an interest in the research in Ireland. So it's to give those stakeholders a voice. We have an implementation forum. I think there's nearly 35 organisations in it, which is all government departments and their agencies that are involved in R&I. So that potentially could be a very valuable forum as we go forward. We'll be creating a new research agency. We're bringing SFI and the Irish Research Council together, not just to put the two together, but I think there's a real opportunity to think about what we need from a new research agency on the landscape and what extra value can it bring. You've probably seen the Creating Our Future campaign, very exciting campaign from a government perspective, getting out and asking. In fairness, people keep telling me it was the asking piece first and then the listening, so proactively getting out there and asking citizens what's important to them. We're working on the science advisory structure. We've just closed a consultation on that. That goes hand in hand, I think, with the work that Trudy's doing in the Evidence for Policy unit. So I suppose this is one of the key initiatives then in this space. We set up a new unit, fully staffed, quite fully staffed, nearly fully staffed in DFERS to connect the public research system with policymakers and vice versa, I think, and Trudy's going to talk to some of the initiatives there and over. So thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Unlike Deirdre, I'm not used to talking in universities and colleges. I'm also used to talking about this in a lot of detail. So if anybody needs to wave at me if I'm going way over time, then please do. I suppose we're in a very fortunate position in that we're a new unit. But we're moving into a space where there are lots of people and lots of activity already. And I think, and I see colleagues here in the audience today who probably will be waving at me and saying, yes, you're right, or may actually object. There's a lot of activity going on. Sometimes policy development moves a bit slower than activity in the sector. So what we're trying to do, and what we're desperately attempting to do, is do no harm to the good stuff that's happening. You're launching Publicpolicy.ie again, or relaunching it. You're making it easier for people such as myself, who are policymakers, doing their jobs day in, day out in government departments, trying to come up with good advice to support the political system to make good decisions. So that's happening. What we want to do is make our side more receptive to your side and make sure that that partnership is really ingrained into what we do and across the board. So this is an early slide, and I keep thinking to myself that we need to revise it again. So we have policymakers, and we look at them just in one group. And I think if we hark back to Deirdre's slide, which is a nice pie chart slide, which has 6 different government departments. And we're in there, Ferris is in there as being, a major funder of research. But speaking with 2 sides of my job, which is the external research piece and the internal research piece, we as a department don't leverage our own research sector properly. So we're talking to everybody saying, it'd be a really good idea if we engage more with higher ed research, and we're not doing it ourselves. So if you take us out of that pie, as being people that really engage at research, there's 5 departments there, and there's 18 government departments. So we have, within that group of policymakers, we have the really engaged departments, and we have really good pockets of engagement across all departments with certain academic partners. But we have all the other departments that aren't engaging as much as they could, and that includes our own internal research piece as well. So the next time you see the slide, there'll be 2 groups of policymakers, the really engaged ones and then the others. And we're trying to get at the others. And then we've kind of split the higher education sector into 2 as well. And that's kind of just reflecting that we're still growing research capability in the technological university side. And there's really, really good, active, kind of really engaged activity here on the university side. So what we want to do is kind of level the playing field and get all actors in that group together, working together and talking the same language. Like if I look at policymakers, some of the stuff that I hear is they don't want to engage with higher education institutions on research because they went out twice last year. In June, we're looking for information back by the middle of July and nobody talked to them. That's kind of a no-brainer if you're coming from higher ed research. We get stuff like, we can do that in-house ourselves. Like we have groups of specialists, and I'll talk about them just a little bit later. Kind of feel, why would we need to engage with the higher ed research side? Because we can do our own evidence synthesis for ground. And my argument there is, if there's nobody doing the core fundamental research out in the system, and you don't engage with people to help them identify what might be relevant to policy development, then what are they going to synthesize down the line? So if that underpinning activity isn't there, like we may as well just hand the money over to private organisations to continually kind of conduct really targeted research. There's a place like we talk about almost a jigsaw of evidence that we need to bring together to deliver good policy. And what we're trying to do is make the piece of that jigsaw, which is higher ed research, we want to make that piece bigger, and we want to make it more transparent and accessible to the policy development side. So that's my goal. And it takes time, and this is where I'm sure it comes to gauge, because I see them there, are kind of saying, what's taking you so long? We've been doing this for ages, So what we need to do is make sure that we have people engaged at all areas and bought into this before we move. And this is why I can't tell you too much today, because we're still in that process. And we're hoping that that'll move really quickly between now and Christmas. So hopefully I'll be back here in January telling you all the really good stuff and all the actions and the timelines associated with those actions, and that everybody's bought in and this is what we're going to do. So that's my aim in life, is to have really good agreement on where we're going kind of between now and Christmas. And it's just bringing together that common language, that visibility from your side as to what we do, the areas that we're interested in, the kind of timing and opportunities for timing for the higher ed side to really deliver impactful kind of messages to our sector. And I'm going to use, we had an old I delivered a strategy which is called Technology Skills 2022, which is all about high-level ICT skills needs. And it was called Technology Skills 2022, which kind of gives you a bit of a lead into, in around 2022, we're looking to replace this strategy with something else. So there's a really good opportunity there to get research, to get information to policymakers in a really targeted manner at the point in time when they're starting to make decisions about strategies. So if we can feed information like that out to the sector, it just gives us a chance, because there's no point coming in 2023 with, a piece of really relevant research when it's too late and it needs to go into the next decision-making cycle in terms of policy development. So that's kind of what we're about and kind of the stage that we're at the moment. I mean, as I said, we're part of an evidence jigsaw. And this goes back to, I think, if we're talking to people on the higher ed side, everybody on that side talks about evidence-based policy. If you talk to policymakers, they'll talk about evidence-informed policy. And sometimes I think it's easier to have evidence-based policy if you're working in the healthcare sector and you get a new drug. And there's, this is how much the drug costs, this is how many lives it's going to save. That's real evidence-based stuff. But in other areas, it's not as cut and dry as that. And this is where we go into evidence-informed policy development. And this is part of where Impact 2030 and all this wider piece comes in. If we can work with yourselves to identify engagement as a key indicator of impact, then that's probably a good thing. Because for us, having a really valuable piece of evidence, which is really good, is really a really good idea, is kind of a no-brainer from an evidence piece, but maybe the timing isn't right. If you look at something like water charges, really good, really evidence-built, looking at, how you influence behaviour, looking at how we upgrade our water network, how we fund that, looking at a really scarce resource in the future, but the timing wasn't right and they couldn't get the public to follow, so they had to roll back. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind when we're making recommendations to ministers as to what the appropriate policy is. So for us as policymakers, sometimes having the report on the shelf, ready to wave it the minute the right opportunity comes on, is a really good outcome of a piece of research. And that's not necessarily, and I'm guessing, and somebody stop me if I'm wrong, the right outcome for yourselves, because you'd like to see it published and you'd like to see it in the policy kind of within a reasonable period of time. So if we can even bring together those, what are our objectives, what are our outcomes, what is a good outcome, what does impact mean? So that's part of what Impact 2030 talks about. So when we're looking at performance frameworks, when we're looking at, assessments of impact of research. So this is all the underpinning kind of systemic work that we're doing to try and bring that conversation along with it. The public policy HE research engagement piece, so that's the piece that I'm talking about. Let's just bring people together. Let's make sure we're speaking in common language, and let's make sure all the actors in the system are engaged. Science advisory structures is the consultation piece that's literally just finished. And there's a lot of, I'm not going to say confusion, I'm going to say overlap between what's science advice and what's research for policy. I mean, that's a discussion we're having inside, kind of in the house as well. Where does one end and the other start? And how do they fit together? So what we want to do is see what the consultation from science advisory structures throws up. We'll then be re-engaging with the system again, probably to do another piece of consultation work on a more targeted, more, what's the sector doing? How do we underpin? Where do we target our activity into the sector? So you will see another consultation process coming through. And that will be happening towards the end of this year and the beginning of next year. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll let you know when it's coming, because we want people to engage. We really need to see what your needs are. And at the same time, we're investigating what the civil service and what the policymaker needs are, so that we can bring all those things together. And one of my pet projects on this, having been an early stage policymaker or early career policymaker, when you go into a new job and you're told, congratulations on the new job, you're delivering this policy by Christmas, you don't know who to talk to. you don't know where to start. And like I've had colleagues tell me that they've been at the end of the policy development process and somebody says, did you not speak to Bob in that college? Because he's a globally renowned expert in that area. And that connectivity was never made. So one of the things my pet project is making sure that early career policymakers and early career researchers have a chance to engage as well. So you'll see that bit, hopefully featuring heavily into the future. So what we're going to do is we're seeing what this tells us. We're bringing together the activity, we're bringing our stakeholders together kind of across those 3 groups that I showed, or the 4 group, if we split the policy development side into 2 and to really engage people already that we need to help see the value of the higher ed research side, and then the people that aren't engaging much and just bring their activity up to the same level as everybody else. So we're going to see what this tells us. We're going to go out again, ask people again. We're going to come up with some bright ideas, run those past people, and see what works. And then we're not doing this in isolation. So that, for my right bottom quadrant, is technical supports and advice. And that's kind of a really short way of saying there's really good stuff going on across the system on the civil service side and on the policy making side. We have, as part of Civil Service Renewal Programme, we're talking about Taoiseachs and Department of Public Expenditure and Reform are engaged in a policy development toolkit process with the OECD. So can we get research embedded into that? And if people are coming up with a step-by-step guide on how to develop policy, let's get our work embedded in there. Let's get the higher ed engagement piece embedded in there. We have IGES supporting data availability. So for IGSS, we have IGES, which is an economic service, and IGSS, which I have no idea how to pronounce the acronym on that, which is our statistical service. So how can we make data more accessible, more open? How can we get all our agencies involved in that? So how do we get the data to you so you can conduct research to really influence what's going on in policy development? And as I said before, we're looking at strategic foresight planning and a policy development framework, and we want to make sure that we're in that. So that's where we are and where we think we're going. Because it's policy development, it takes a bit longer than I think we'd all like because of lining everybody up. But welcome to the policy development process. and I know Campus Engage have been trying to let people know through their programs as well what that process kind of looks like a bit, and how, if you're talking to us and you're trying to influence us, make it simple. We have different backgrounds. Everybody has degrees, masters, PhDs, but sometimes it's not in the same area that you're talking to us about. So keeping things plain, simple, engaging with us, keeping an eye out for what's going on, engaging with, any consultation processes that go out, particularly the one that you see coming up between now and Christmas or around then, because we really do value kind of the input of the sector. And we do need that evidence-based, whether we call it evidence-informed or evidence-based. The more concrete information that we can give to the political system, the better the decisions are going to be down on. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Deirdre and Trudy. A lot of what you said there would have been music to the ears of many people in this room. I'm sure there are many questions. Hold them. We have 2 other quickish talks, and then we'll return to a Q&A. So next up then is somebody you'll know very well, Professor Michelle Norris, who is the director here of the Geary Institute for Public Policy. Much of whose thinking, both Michelle's and the Institute's, really align with what we just heard from Trudy. So Michelle, I'll hand over to you now.
So it's all in one PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Orla, and thank you to Deirdre and Trudy for coming along today. And thanks everybody else for coming along to engage in what I'm hoping is a 2-way discussion and an opportunity for researchers from UCD and the researchers attached to the Geary Institute to dialogue with policy makers about the role of research in policy making.
The Geary Institute for Public Policy, as its name implies, our work focuses very heavily in this area. The institute was founded in 1999, and it's one of 6 research institutes within UCD that are intended to support research and also facilitate interdisciplinary working and exchange of ideas across fields, because when academics are attached to schools based on disciplines, we tend to be a bit siloed. So one of the functions of the institutes is to overcome that. People often ask me this, so you're probably wondering why we call the Geary Institute. We're named in honour of Roy Geary, who was one of the people who set up the Central Statistics Office. Irish polymath across the social sciences, worked in economics, demography, and lots of his ideas are still used in social sciences today. And the purpose of the Geary Institute for Public Policy is to support empirically grounded, policy relevant research, and particularly in the social sciences and the behavioural sciences. So we have about 100 fellows, members of faculty within the university who are fellows of the Geary Institute, and we cover a whole wide range of disciplines within the social sciences. And colleagues are involved in research that addresses some of the key societal challenges we're facing, and also relevant to some of the key public policy priorities. So we were really delighted within the Institute to see Impact 2030, and it really, as I said, chimes with our concerns. So we've been busy revising our strategic plan to just speak to some of the priorities you've identified in Impact 2030. And I thought I'd just start by briefly talking about some of those and some of the activities we carry out. And Dr. Laura Foley, my colleague who's leading some of these activities, is going to talk about this in a bit more depth. So when we were reworking our strategic plan, we started to think about our work in supporting policy relevant research. And rather than, which is kind of usual in academia, divide our work into themes, we decided actually we would try to think about the work we do as speaking to different phases of what political scientists call the policy cycle. So there's always a cycle of making policy, of deciding, what are priorities for policy, what are the data we need to inform those policies, formulating, implementing, evaluating, assessing policy. So one of our key objectives, is to support excellent social science research across the policy cycle. So both relevant to kind of agenda setting in policy, formulation, implementation, etc. So you can see the graphic from our strategic plan there. Just to highlight some of the work we already do, and I suppose highlight particular priorities we feel we've identified in relation to research for policy, and particular contributions we feel academics can make. A lot of the work we do is around evidence and data for policy relevant to setting the agenda for policy, so relevant to futures thinking around how is the demography of Ireland going to unfold, what are the challenges we're going to face in 20 years, what are the key social needs among young people or different sections of the population. And I think that's a particularly important contribution which academics can make, which maybe would be more difficult to make from within the policy system. So in that area, we coordinate the Irish module of the European Social Survey, and we're just about to go out with the third round of the European Social Survey. We've coordinated, they're just about to go into the field with their survey. And I also have colleagues, Jenny Simmons from the School of Education has just won a big EU grant to put together a data infrastructure on child wellbeing called Growing Up in a Digital Europe. So we feel that area of work in terms of activities in generating data for policy and interpreting that data for policy is particularly important. And some of that area is an area where government in Ireland hasn't invested as much as governments abroad. So my own work focuses on housing, and particularly housing for low-income households. And it often strikes me, for instance, we're one of the few countries in Europe without a national housing survey. And that makes proper projections of housing needs going forward, proper assessment of housing, very, very difficult. We haven't conducted a house conditions survey since 1990, for instance. So that makes planning for energy efficiency, etc., very difficult. And I think that investment would be very valuable and also feed into links between policymakers or enable researchers to make use of this extended data and use it in their research. We're also involved in work in terms of influencing policy formation. So we've been involved in work with UN Habitat and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe around housing policy around Europe. We have colleagues working on the area of sexual exploitation. The Sexual Exploitation Research Project is based here, and they're very heavily involved in working with the Department of Children in that work. Then in assessing policy impact, a European Research Council project led by Professor Roland Dern is based here, which looks at the impact of EU policy on trade unions and labour market policy. And then at the kind of other end of the policy cycle, colleagues are involved in research for the Environmental Protection Agency, which commissions a lot of research. We've been involved, my colleague Orla Doyle from the School of Economics has been involved in one of the longest studies of an intervention for disadvantaged children called Preparing for Life. And my colleague Micheál Collins from the School of Social Policy, Social Work and Social Justice is involved in research for the Low Pay Commission. So we're involved in research quite right across the policy cycle and committed to working more closely with policymakers with appropriate supports. But we see investment in what would be called fundamental research in the hard sciences. That investment is also relevant or very necessary in the social sciences. So the kind of final phase of our work on in terms of research for policy, it concerns maximising the impact of research on policy. So Deirdre mentioned the importance of collaboration and also dissemination of information in an understandable way to policymakers to maximise impact. So that's something we've been working very hard on. We're also actively involved in collaboration, particularly with the Irish Government Economic Evaluation Service that Deirdre mentioned. So some colleagues here were on the group that advised on the establishment of IGEF. I'm on their advisory board, and we're running a series of webinars with them in the autumn on new ideas in policy making. We have colleagues from the Geary Institute involved in the National Economic and Social Council, the National Economic and the National Economic Dialogue. We're also involved in more, I suppose, formal advice to government through memberships of expert groups, for instance, the Housing Commission, of which I'm a member. And then finally, the kind of third area we plan to focus on in our work in maximising policy impact is around dissemination. So we're doing that through joint events with policymakers, with policy implementers. We're running a series of webinars with the Land Development Agency and the Housing Agency at the moment that are very highly attended. But the other area of our work is particularly in Publicpolicy.ie. So in recent years, we've managed to grow the activity on Publicpolicy.ie very substantially, and it's intended to be an online platform for disseminating the results of research to policymakers in an understandable way. And that's particularly being led by Laura Foley, my colleague, who's really done a super job in revamping the website and also in increasing the activity on the site and the engagement with colleagues from around the university. So I'm going to hand over to Laura to speak about that.
So thank you, Michelle. So as Michelle mentioned, I'm managing the content on the Publicpolicy.ie website. So it's our online platform where we disseminate policy-related information in a clear and accessible way to policymakers, to members of the public, and to academics. So the aim is to really provide independent evidence to inform discussions around a range of policy areas, so economic, health, social, environmental, educational policies in Ireland. And as Michelle mentioned, over the past few months, we have really streamlined the content on the website and revamped the website to make it more accessible. So we disseminate policy-related research in two main ways. So firstly, we publish original content, and this consists of papers written by researchers on a range of policy issues that are relevant for academic and contemporary debates about public policy in Ireland. And the second way that we disseminate policy-related information is that we flag the publication of external reports also on the website. There's an external reports function and there's a papers tab up the top. So in the past year, the papers on our website have covered a really diverse range of topics. So we've had papers that looked at the impact of COVID-19 on children, on the labour market, on travel and on healthcare. We've had a paper on suicide prevention strategies and assessment of the impact of the policy of free GP care on free GP care for children under 6, and how this policy then impacts attendance at unscheduled paediatric healthcare. We've had a paper on maths anxiety among children, an analysis of student voice, how to promote student voice and well-being through social innovation education. We've looked at an examination of gender-based violence in Ireland, financial inclusion among social housing tenants. So there's been a really diverse range of papers, and I haven't been able to mention them all, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of the kind of types of topics that we've been covering. So really this is a bit of a pitch that if you are a researcher who's working on a policy-related issue, please do get in touch with us if you're interested in writing a short paper. So 1,500 to 3,000 words. And we can assist you, we can provide editorial support, we can help guide you throughout the whole process. And I promise you it is smoother and quicker than having to navigate academic publishing in journals. So please do get in touch with us. And please do check out the range of papers that are on the website. And there's also a section on how to submit your research. But yeah, we're here to, if you're interested, do get in touch with us. And yeah, thank you very much for coming today.